Hello, and welcome back to another video. It's time to take a ride on the veteran Sherman back towards Manhattan from Randall's Island. I hope y'all are doing good. Thanks for clicking. Thanks for joining me on yet another video. I upload every day if you're new here, so you might want to subscribe and never miss an episode. Today I want to talk about interest rates and interest payments in general as a whole. What is interest for those who are financially unaware, or I don't want to say financially illiterate because I feel like I'm insulting you, but if you don't know what interest is, it's when you borrow money, like from a bank or a person, and then when you borrow that money, you have to pay extra money when you're paying the money back. So if I borrow $10 from you today, that means I owe you, for example, $12 on Monday. So I paid you an extra $2 back. And if I wait till Wednesday, then I owe you $13. And if I wait till Friday, then I owe you $15, and so on. And the money keeps going up, the amount I owe you, until I pay it all off. And that's called interest, the amount of money that accumulates on top of your debt. The longer you don't pay your debt, the more money you owe. And so basically, if I am the creditor, the person who's lending money, I'm just making free money over time. And the more money I lend out, then the more money I potentially get, because interest is usually a percentage of the money that you lent out. So if I lent out $100,000, the interest is not going to be $1. It's going to be like 1%, which would be like $100. And it's usually accumulated monthly, and it's usually compounding, which means it's 1% of the new amount that's owed. So if I owe $100,000, then I owe $101,000. Now it's 1% of the $101,000, not of the $100,000. And that might not seem like a big deal because it's just slightly more, but compounding interest does snowball very quickly. And if you don't pay back the original debt quickly, or the principal, then you end up owing a lot more money than you borrowed. And so what's wrong with this? Why is this a big deal? In fact, one might even say the person who's lending out the money takes a huge risk because he might not get paid back at all. So it's worth it for him to have some interest rate or some amount of money that he earns off of the loan. And yes, that may be partially true. There's still a lot wrong with interest payments. Now, let's just first clear the air on religion, which there are religions that completely prohibit and forbid interest, such as Islam and Judaism. Judaism, not exactly though. Judaism actually does permit interest from one Jew to another non-Jew. But from a Jewish person to another Jewish person, you are not allowed to charge them interest on a loan. You have to accept only the money you lent them, pay it back without any extra money on top. We won't go too much farther into that. I'll leave you to form your own conclusions about that. That's something you can research and learn more about, because I myself am not even fully educated on the matter. But I will tell you this: in Islam, it's completely forbidden to pay interest, to enter into a deal that involves paying interest. And it's forbidden to accept interest. So you may not lend money and accept interest from anyone, not just from Muslims, but from anyone at all. Which leads me to my next part of this explanation as to why I think that interest is a scourge upon our society. Now, I think that when you lend money, or when you give someone the opportunity to pay for something, for example, a house. So a lot of people can't afford to just pay $500,000 for a house up front. So they want to pay you $10,000 a month, let's say, for the next 10 years. And that's called finance payments. So why is interest not allowed or not good in a situation like that? Well, in many cases, when you look at bank agreements where they lend you money or give you a mortgage, the amount of interest comes out to be an astounding amount, and it accumulates relentlessly, which leaves the borrower in a precarious position as far as being in debt and eventually losing out on a lot of the money they paid if they don't follow through or they're unable to follow through on all the payments. Penalties and interest rise so heftily, in fact, that the person is forced to do what's called a foreclosure and has to give up the house back and forfeit a lot of the money, if not all the money that they already paid. Because the penalties and the interest stack up so severely that it's not like you are reversing the transaction and getting back the, let's say, $100,000 you paid. In fact, you end up still owing more money on top of the money you paid, and you still are left with no house. So, in other words, interest might sound reasonable and acceptable on paper, but what ends up happening in real life situations is it accumulates so fast and rapidly without the allowance of stutter stepping or the missing of payments or slowness to pay, to the point where a group of bankers could essentially descend upon a town and seize all the assets of the town and be that much richer and then leave, all using the magic and the power of interest, which again looks and sounds reasonable when you're signing the agreement, but in actual practice it turns out to be incredibly ruthless, and the compounding nature of it makes it so powerful that really it's very difficult to overcome. In other words, you end up paying a huge price. And this leads me to the next part of our argument as to why interest is a scourge upon our world. So the person who continues to earn money from interest is just earning money from that person's inability to follow through with a transaction, which it happens. I mean, let's say you're perfectly healthy and working, and you accept you enter into a finance program with a lender, and then you get sick. It happens. You should not enter into an agreement where interest is going to compound and takes zero regard for your health or your ability to pay, without completely penalizing you and cutting you up piece by piece and taking all of your hard-earned wealth without the opportunity or the outlet of escape from interest. So some might say, okay, so it's not the interest then. It's the agreement that includes interest but includes other elements which are making it harmful for the borrower. Well, yes, but then once you eliminate interest, or once you eliminate that interest system, what you enter into is what's nowadays being referred to as a halal loan or an Islamic loan, where the person buys the house and then sells it to you at a slightly larger price and sets up a payment plan system. There is some debate as to whether or not this is indeed a prohibited or forbidden reworking of interest, or whether it's actually a legitimate and great alternative to interest. Because people who don't accept interest upon themselves, which by the way may not just be Muslims, but maybe people of any faith who just find that interest is repugnant and they would rather save their money up and buy something once they've saved the money and they have enough money to pay for the item in full, or they'd rather enter into an agreement that doesn't involve the use of interest, otherwise known as usury in the Bible as well. So it's also forbidden in Christianity to some degree as well. And then they can enter into the agreement that doesn't involve interest and finance pay for the thing they're looking to buy that way. So, where does that leave us here? That leaves us with a payment system where if you do foreclose, you're not suddenly racking up all this extra amount on your debt via interest, but rather you are now forced to forfeit the item, or you're giving an option to forfeit the item. But either way, there's no interest involved. You're either following through with the payment plan or you're not. And then there's a transaction reversal or a forfeiture that comes from the borrower in the event of the inability to pay or the desire to not follow through. So, what can happen when interest is left to run amok? Well, take the CVS store here, for example. CVS may have loans and investors and money that it's taken from the bank to stock up all of its shelves And so in addition to CVS needing to pay the overhead every month, they also have to pay back the loan money that they've taken to stock their shelves. So in other words, in addition to the rent they have to pay, and in addition to the employees they have to pay, they also have to make sure that they're making enough money from month to month to cover their principal for their loans that they've agreed to pay regularly, and the amount of interest that is accumulating on top of the borrowed money from month to month, which actually results in such a hefty amount of money being owed to the lender that it makes the business no longer viable and no longer profitable. In fact, it can single-handedly put out all of the workers and the entire business altogether because of the amount of money that's owed that it can no longer repay. Not because the business was fledgling or unable to make money to operate. Not even because the business was not a good, successful model that was earning money and being profitable, but rather because the interest was accumulating, and the interest had a chance to compound during the slower months to such an extent that it no longer was able to stay afloat and became required to shut down, therefore making the lender the new owner of the operation, where they could basically shut it down or rebrand it or sell it, and they were able to now take over the business, unjustly so, because of a game of numbers. And these are just small examples and micro examples of how interest destroys families and businesses. But if you look on a wider scale, those small examples of the destruction become magnified and actually rear their ugly faces with horrendous magnitude and viciousness. And this is why interest is a scourge upon our world and should be eradicated immediately. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see all of you very soon. Have a great day. Goodbye.